YouTube's got it. There we go. Hey, y'all, Pastor Emil here with another episode of Sweet Jesus. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Ice cream is sweet, but Jesus is far sweeter. Got Pastor Brock Kane in here with us today. We're not doing ice cream because we meet at around 10 o'clock on Thursday mornings, and that's just a little too early for ice cream most days.
I think it is.
Although there is one day every year that we have to have ice cream for breakfast, and that's National Ice Cream for Breakfast Day. It's
that's a day.
First or second Saturday in February.
Okay.
So mark your calendars, but not today. That's not today.
Okay.
So today I just had a Kind bar. There's a little chocolate in there. It's kind of healthy and sweet at the same time. And Brock, what do you got in that cup of Joe?
I did breakfast blend today.
Breakfast blend.
It's quite tasty, actually.
Okay, not as tasty as pumpkin pecan pie or something.
Yeah, whatever
right?
that was. That was pretty good.
Just you're feeling a little less sweet, a little more bitter today.
You weren't recording that conversation we had earlier, were you? Okay, that's good.
That's the recording.
Yeah, let's just go with that.
We'll just go with that. That's it. But we are inviting you to join us as we continue through sort of the basics of the Christian faith. We're taking a look at the Ten Commandments. We're at the fifth commandment now, and we invite you to pull up something sweet, put some sugar or honey in your coffee or tea, and or maybe you're catching it later on. You can scoop some ice cream because it's not 10 a.m. and join us as we take a look at some things here today in the fifth commandment. So, fifth commandment, you shall not murder. What does this mean? This is out of the Small Catechism, Luther's Small Catechism. And what does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and support him in every physical need. And I think you've mentioned this before, that the commandments aren't just about keeping us from doing certain things. It's about protecting something.
That's exactly right.
And this is clearly about protecting life.
Sure.
And life, of course, is a tremendous gift from God. We don't ask to be brought into this world. We don't do anything to be brought into this world. We just sort of show up.
Yeah.
And it's a precious gift from God. So we need to treat it not just ourselves, but other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. You just read Luther's explanation there of the commandment, and I think it was when we discussed the third commandment. Remember the Sabbath, and you read from Luther's Catechism and the explanation, and we discussed how Luther's explanations can really offer some helpful insight. But that doesn't mean he covers everything. And sometimes they're a little incomplete. And in this case, I appreciate how Luther covers kind of opens up the spectrum of how we protect our own lives and our neighbors' lives. But he paints it in a very physical light. That it is physical harm against the body in ourselves or our neighbors or anyone else. And he's not wrong, but this, reading the Gospels and how Jesus sort of interprets the commandments and applies them to our lives, he opens it up even further, and I think that's a helpful thing to discuss. Anytime I've taught the commandments in the past, we go through these things, we study what they mean, what they say, how they apply to our lives, and inevitably we reach the conclusion when we study a commandment, oh wow, I have lost sight of that, and I have not kept that in my life. And anytime I teach these, we get to this commandment: "You shall not murder."
And everyone's going,
Everybody breathes a sigh of relief. Phew, finally one I haven't committed. And then,
like the others, they're like, oh, did I accidentally do this?
Yeah.
You don't accidentally kill people on a regular basis.
No,
it's sort of something. I mean, that's not that doesn't happen. It's just that it doesn't happen often, and you don't kind of forget about it.
And we don't think about ourselves in that light, you know. But I guess the point here is that Jesus doesn't allow us to get off the hook with that one.
No, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, he basically reinterprets the Ten Commandments. He's on a mountain, Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And he is giving out instruction, teaching, right? How do you live your life in light of God's kingship?
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know. It's interesting. And I said this and you just said it, but now that I think about it, I'm not sure if reinterpreting the commandments,
expounding on it, digging deeper,
helping people to come to see them reflected in their own lives in a new way,
in all the fullness of what the intent originally was.
Yeah. It's interesting. I did a Sunday morning class early this year or last year on the Beatitudes. And we went through that. But I had, and this is for your listeners, if you're not familiar with that, it's the first 12 verses of Matthew chapter 5, and it's the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. So in order to understand this, I gave my class some homework, which I don't know if you ever do that and how successful you are with that. But
we're going to find out.
Yikes. But the assignment was to go home and read the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6, and 7. And to come back and tell me what the topic of that sermon is. And we discussed it at length, and the topic of the sermon appears to be not letting people off the hook of the law. No one can convince themselves they've found a loophole around or through any law. I told my class if I had written that sermon and needed to give it a title, it would have been titled "Think Again."
You're not as good as you thought you were.
That's exactly right. And so that's how we need to think about the law in our lives and look at these commandments. And this commandment here, this one and the next one, are great challenges in that respect. They're very good for each and every Christian, I think, to re-examine their own lives in the context of God's Word and see how it applies.
And the interesting thing, this isn't directly about the fifth commandment, really, but we're talking about the Sermon on the Mount, and I heard a sermon by Tim Keller, and he's talking about the Sermon on the Mount. He was kind of starting a series on it. He's introducing it. And, a lot of people, particularly people in places like Manhattan, secular people, non-religious people, they typically think about Jesus and they go, well, I like Jesus. I like the teacher Jesus. I don't like this whole Savior thing. I don't like this religion thing. I don't like this heaven and hell thing. I don't want you to push that on me. I don't want to hear about it. But Jesus is a nice teacher. And I think he was telling the story about some college professor that makes his students read the Sermon on the Mount as one of the lessons in some kind of secular public college, university, whatever, and then write about it, and they hate it. They hate it. They're rough, like, what's wrong with this? Like, this is stupid. And these are the people that say, oh, well, Jesus is a nice teacher. They don't know what he's actually taught.
No, and that's a great point. Much of the world tends to look at Jesus as another Buddha.
Yeah.
Or just some enlightened person.
A hippie,
Yeah.
Love, the Beatles. Love, 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 just love. Let's all feel good.
What a romantic you are.
Oh, God, no. Anyway, let's not go there.
Yeah, let's move on.
So I think where we started down this little squirrel, rabbit hole, whatever you want to call it, was because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus takes the fifth commandment and the sixth commandment very specifically. We'll
Yes.
talk about the sixth commandment next time. But the fifth commandment specifically, and he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not murder.' But I say to you, you can't even get angry with your brother
Yeah.
because it's the same thing. The root cause is the same." We actually read a little bit. I did an introduction to the commandments last night with our confirmation students and the adults that are part of that also. And just you are not as good as you think you are. And we often obsess about things that aren't nearly as important. And we read Mark chapter 7. We're talking about food.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because generally the law and the ceremonial law and the political law, but also the moral law, what do we keep today, and why don't we keep the food requirements? And then we read this passage from Jesus in Mark chapter 7 where it says thus he declared all foods clean, because he says it's not what goes into your body, it's what
Yeah.
comes out. Out of the heart is what comes murder and slander and wickedness of every different kind. So anger is that thing in the heart that leads us to murder.
That's right. That's right. And that, that gets at something, you and I were discussing just a little while ago, the language of this commandment. It says, "You shall not murder." It doesn't say you shall not kill. So there's a distinction there between killing and murder, and anytime we discuss this commandment, we always have to acknowledge the reality of that and think about the soldier, the person who protects us, who must, kill in battle or, for the sake of, protecting the good or the innocent. So what is the difference? What defines murder? And it is exactly that. It is what comes out of the heart. It's where it originates, and that's not to get us off the hook from killing.
Yeah, I think either way, we're not designed to take life.
No.
We're wired to support life.
Exactly.
That's the point. A flourishing community of human beings is one where death is not part of the equation.
Right. That's exactly right.
But we live in this messed up world, and and Paul and others throughout Scripture, God has given the sword to the government,
right,
to punish the evildoer and protect those who do right, and so that's kind of where we get into this messiness, and
to do so with discretion and hesitance, and deliberation. Anytime death is celebrated, it's somehow an act of murder.
Yeah.
Well,
in our own criminal justice system, there is a distinction between different kinds of killing.
And that's true. That's absolutely true.
First degree murder, I believe. I'm not a lawyer, so you're going to have to correct us, everybody. Anybody out there listening, you're going to have to set us straight on this. But I'm pretty sure first degree murder is like a premeditated, I am so full of rage and hatred and anger and whatever it is that I am going to take my time to plot carefully, cold, calculating, trying to put an end to this person's life. Second degree murder, I think, doesn't quite have the same thing. Third degree murder, and then of course there's manslaughter. There, accidental killing.
There's killing in the moment of passion, which is
so
defined differently as well.
If you are not of sound mind, sort of is part of what goes into that. So, but either way, you are responsible. You're just maybe not as responsible. And of course, there is still this element of anger. You can lead yourself into that situation by fostering that, by feeding that idea, that anger.
Sure.
Right? So anger, if you allow anger to take root in your life, if you help it and you allow it to grow and to continue to exist, you may find yourself, Like, I think people often look at people who have murdered and all that kind of stuff, and they say, man, what a horrible human being. Like, what would possess someone to do that? You don't know yourself well enough. You don't know just how close, if you have ever been angry, you don't know just how close you are to doing something like that.
There's a comedian that my family loves to watch, and the guy, I don't remember how the subject came up, but in one of his bits, he says he was talking about ex-girlfriends and things like that, and he said I've my whole life I've never understood how one human being could take another human being's life. I don't get it. I can't imagine it. You know, how you could bring yourself to do such a horrific thing. He says, but then I got cheated on. He says, okay, I'm not going to do it, but I get it now.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't remember who it was I was reading, but someone made the point that our prisons are full to the gills of people who never in a million years would have believed that they would do what put them there. Just like you and me, you know, and murder it originates from something that's in all of us. And all it takes is the wrong set of circumstances sometimes for it to change things externally, you know.
Yeah, there's a guy, I'm wearing my chaplain shirt. If you're watching on, I don't know.
Yeah, we're all very proud of you.
Very proud of me. I'm with the St. Tammany Parish Coroner's Office. I'm on call today. Hopefully nothing during the next half hour or so. But it involves some training, and one of the leaders of the effort to create this chaplain program with the Coroner's Office is a guy by the name of Don Bryan. He's a pastor in town here at First Pentecostal Church, and he did one of the trainings, and he talked about anger. There was anger a part of what we were talking about that particular day. I don't remember all that, but I remember him telling the story and talking about prison and how there's maybe 5 minutes that most people in prison, if you could take those 5 minutes out of their life, they would not be in prison.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 or 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be there. And what does that? I think it's anger.
Yeah.
That ultimately gives us the motivation, which is not really the right word, but the negative motivation, the thing that causes us and propels us into things that we never would have dreamed we'd be capable of doing.
Yeah. And if you've ever experienced what you would call blind rage, you know, it's a moment where we can pinpoint how this anger has so taken over our lives that we can't think of anything else. You know, we're completely wrapped up in that emotion, and we have become slaves to it. And that's a very scary thing, and it's something most of us have experienced. We're just very fortunate that, you know, we weren't in a position in a moment where it could completely change our lives that way.
Yeah. So, first step in dealing with the fifth commandment, consider your anger.
Yeah.
And do what you can to get it under control.
And the things that are associated with anger. You know, a lot of times I have felt I've had a bad day, and I've been experiencing emotions and trying to get a handle on it and trying to understand what I'm feeling. And it's not quite anger, but maybe it's fear or frustration or jealousy or any of those things, you know, that all sort of facilitate the same, that same blindness.
So you bring up a good point. I think this was the thing. Remember I told you I had some thought about the fifth commandment and I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
So actually all of the commandments, maybe I've said this before, if I have, stop me, but it's worth repeating. All of the commandments ultimately flow out of the first commandment.
Absolutely.
And so that's why the first commandment, you shall have no other gods, the explanation that we have is we should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. And what happens when our anger gets out of control is it's something that we fear, love, and trust in more than God, and it's being taken from us.
Oh, sure.
Right? So why is this guy willing to consider murder when his girlfriend cheats on him? Well, because he believes that, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily wrong or unreasonable. Okay, I think everybody would get pretty mad. But, there's something more important to him than God, and that is his pride. That is
absolutely.
The relationship, the love, the whatever. There's 1,000 things we can wrap up in there that he has now, and most people do, right? We all do to some degree, have elevated above God. Because if God is number one, if we fear, love, and trust in God above all things, we're more worried about murdering someone than we are about being disrespected and humiliated.
That's right.
And again, none of us get off the hook when we go through these, especially when we read through the Sermon on the Mount. But what is it, if you feel yourself starting to get angry, you would do well to try to uncover the underlying thing that you value most.
Oh, good point. That's a good point. And, you mentioned earlier in this discussion about how, this is about comparing, what we value, what is central to our lives. And so if I'm feeling something that's cutting me off from God and from other people, then what am I protecting versus what God is trying to protect? And usually, and again, you brought up, things like my vanity, or my pride, or things of that nature. That's what I tend to try to protect.
Oh, yeah, big time. Guys, especially. We have a lot of other things, though, too. It's not just that. Sometimes it's connected to our pride. In fact, probably most of the time it's connected to our pride, but it could be so pride in the sense that it's what makes us feel good about ourselves.
Right.
So is it our looks? Is it our physical abilities, physical fitness, kind of I can do this and you can't sort of? Is it a career? Is it the influence of
social
certain people?
Status.
Yeah. Is it wealth? Is it control? Right? I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of you're able to control your environment, and then all of a sudden you can't, and now you're willing to kill or get you at least very least you get angry about it.
Yeah.
Those are things where, okay, my God is really control. Or sex and drugs. What are some of the things behind that? Well, it's an escape.
Yeah.
Right? So I need to escape from certain things in my past or in my life that are a painful reality.
Looking at the first commandment, it just boils down to one thing. There are only two potential gods, either the Lord or me. And I'm going to try to protect either my relationship with the one who really can look out for me and provide for me the things that I need and give me a hope for the future, or I'm going to try to protect my idea of myself. And anything that threatens that is going to bring out these things that are in me that are going to cause me to cut myself off. And that's what, I when I've talked about this in the past with Jesus' words about murder and how he equates it to that anger and those other emotions, why does he call it murder? Well, what does a murder do? It cuts someone off from this world, right? Well, that's what my anger does. Cuts me off.
Good point.
It cuts me off from you. It cuts me off from having a relationship with other people. And if I'm doing that, then I'm also severing the quality of my relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, when we get angry, there's a tendency for us to completely isolate ourselves, and frankly, our anger makes other people want to isolate themselves from us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people don't really like being around people like that, which becomes sort of a circular cycle. Like it just
It
keeps
reinforces it.
yeah. You just get more angry because now people are cutting you off, and so it's a toxic thing. It's an important thing to get under control. I have a lot of anger in my family, so like I just look back, and at least one side of my family where there's just a lot of it. I mean, some very good reasons, over the last several years, I've started to piece together the puzzle, the history. And I go, oh, well, those are all things that would make people angry. I mean, they make me angry. But then it's become this identifying characteristic of us, right? That this is who we are. This is
how we handle things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And being from New York, I mean, everybody's very expressive in New York. Maybe not everybody. My wife is from New York, and she's not necessarily like this. But no, we New Yorkers do tend to be, you get cut off enough, you get stepped on enough, you get people that are trying to take advantage of you enough, you start to become a little more assertive.
Yeah. Too many people living in close proximity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because what's wrong with the world? People.
Yeah. They're the worst.
So the more people you got, the worse life can be sometimes. But also the best thing about life is people.
Sure.
So you have both extremes in
well, and it's
places like
interesting that you put it that way and talk about anger as sort of an identifying characteristic. It can become something that we protect because we often equate our anger with a kind of self-righteousness.
Yes.
I am angry at you because you said or did this. And as long as you're not groveling, for forgiveness, I'm going to hang on to that anger because it feels good. It makes me feel justified.
Well, this is what the news does.
Oh.
The news tries to get us angry because
Yeah.
it does release chemicals in our brain, and it becomes a reinforcing, addictive
Yeah.
kind of thing.
That's-
And politics in general, this is what happens, and it does not matter which candidate or party that you favor for whatever reasons. You are susceptible to being becoming addicted to anger because that's what the process does.
Yeah.
And the only way you can stay angry, you were kind of getting at this when you first brought this up. The only way you can stay angry is if you think you're better than them.
Sure.
The self-righteousness.
Sure, absolutely.
And you're not.
But that's a drug that you need to keep taking in greater and greater quantities, and I heard it mentioned somewhere recently that, you talked about the news, that's one of the ways that we do that. And it's fodder for the recreationally outraged, which I thought was a great phrase. And it's very true. So it's just one of the many ways that we do try to do that. Social media is another. It is a false portrait of a person's life. And so we use it as a sort of standard to judge the quality of someone else's life compared to my own. So yeah, it is something that we do actively try to protect and look out for is this right to be angry. And so I remember in times in the past talking about this commandment or this subject and this subject of anger from a biblical standpoint. And can anger be righteous? What is God's righteous anger, and how does it compare to my own? Which is maybe a subject we don't have time for today to completely explore. But
Well, I've gone with, I don't know, I feel like I've gone back and forth between both extremes on that one.
yeah,
There's an article, I think you can still get it online, by a guy named Jeff Gibbs, Dr. Jeff Gibbs. He's a professor at the seminary in St. Louis, Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. I think if you go to concordiatheology.org, CONCORDIATHEOLOGY.org. You look for the myth of righteous anger, and he did an article, he did a study on anger, and basically says, there is nothing in the Bible that says anything that we're supposed to get angry.
Yeah.
Or that if our anger is righteous, then it's okay.
Yeah.
He says that the Bible emphatically only places righteous anger in one place. That's with God. Nobody else. We're not capable of it, is kind of his point. But I have, in the last couple of years, as I've listened to some folks talk about love, and that, basically the opposite, I think is the opposite of love is anger, is what this guy was saying. And so when you get angry, it's because you love something, which is what we were saying, right?
Right.
We were saying that you fear, love, and trust in God above all things, or do you love something else, and that's what makes you angry? But if you truly love someone, if something happens to them, it will make you angry. And that's what God, why God gets angry. God gets angry not because he's interested in, being
It's
this...
not a power trip.
Yeah. He really, really loves. And so because he really, really, really loves, he is much more capable of anger. But it's a special anger that is a pure anger. It is the righteous anger. It's not an anger that's going to be, I don't know, you look like...
Well, it's, you and I have both used that phrase a good bit here, but what is the difference between righteous anger and my anger?
Well, I was about to say, and I was like, I don't know, is that right? Is it destructive? Is it...
I think it's the outcome.
Okay.
So I think you put that beautifully about, and Dr. Gibbs is a very smart man, and fully capable of articulating these things quite well. I encourage you to check that out if you haven't seen it. But I think it is very true that God's anger is a result of his love of others, and as it is purely associated with his love, the outcome of his anger is that he's going to do something to try to protect or draw those that he loves back toward him. It may not always seem like a pleasant thing at first, but the source and the outcome is love. My anger, the outcome, even if it is, directed at someone who's hurt someone I love,
it's still about me.
The outcome is going to wind up being selfish and destructive.
Yeah.
It's not going to help, usually. So I think that is the big difference between the righteous anger and our human anger, is that our human anger tends to lead to brokenness a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, we've talked an awful lot about anger, but there's more to this commandment.
Way more. Yeah.
We must be two angry, crotchety old men.
We're getting there.
And this is forefront of our mind.
Growing on our faces.
Well, we just had an election too, and I think politics more and more is so focused on anger and getting people angry and all that stuff. So I think it's appropriate. But there is also a physical component to this that I don't think we take as seriously as we probably should. We, abortion is a big topic that people have talked about with this particular commandment. I'm not sure that we need to explain that a whole lot more. I heard a guy say that, you know what? I don't have any opinions about abortion because I figure there's enough women on both sides of the issue that we should just let them figure it out. And I was like, that's actually kind of interesting. There are plenty of Christians, pro-choice, pro-life. You know what? I just don't want to. I don't want to deal with this anymore.
That's the most justifiable cop-out I've ever heard in my life.
It was, but I think it actually starts, long before, right? Anger was long before you actually kill someone.
Sure.
And even before you get to murder, there is the care and concern for the body and life of people around you.
Sure.
You know, what are we doing? And actually, I would say that that's the thing that really upsets people the most on, I guess, the pro-choice side, that they are actually not concerned with life. They're thinking about the other side of it in a sense that, well, that's the accusation at least.
Sure.
So, well, what about all the people that are hungry and that are poor? And if we have this young woman now who gives birth, she's going to be destined to what are we doing to help her get up, take care of her body, her life, support her in every physical need? And I actually think that's part of what's our problem with politics is we're talking past each other,
Yeah.
and we're all valuing good things in a sense, but not
We're a
all
little
the
too
good
concerned with seeing someone else as the enemy rather than coming, to a helpful conclusion.
Yeah.
And it's, I find more and more Christians today seem to be really tuning in to that concern.
Yeah.
That they're recognizing that this isn't just a one issue question.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot more effort being taken. I actually had a visit a couple of weeks ago from a lady from a women's resource center down on the Gulf Coast, and she explained a lot about what they do there, and it's sort of the total package, for helping young mothers, young families. They have parenting classes for fathers and all sorts of things, and supporting people, getting them on the right track to, provide a healthy and good upbringing, for children, so that this, we are expanding our understanding, of these issues.
And I mean, this is something that I think the church, Christians around the world, well, particularly in America at least, that we need to get right. We need to get right the idea that people in poverty, people struggling, people that need hand-ups, there are a lot more of them than we like to think.
And this is a Fifth Commandment issue.
And it's a Fifth Commandment issue. It's, so if you are pro-life, you cannot only be pro-life insofar as making some kind of legal change that prevents one particular type of murder, killing, however you would define. Some people define the murder and kill thing a little differently. But we got to get this right. And historically, the church has gotten this right. And that's why the church has flourished. That's why the church exists. That's why the church made it out of the persecution in the first few centuries. They took such good care of the poor. It was an embarrassment to the emperor.
Yeah.
And the emperor said, well, why don't you guys go serve some poor people, because you're making me look bad.
Yeah.
You're making me look bad, and they're gaining popularity, and this is bad, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff.
They're taking care of people who aren't even part of their community of believers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big difference maker.
Now, the challenge is most Christians in America tend to really distrust government. And I think we underestimate the number of people that are struggling, that need this help, and how often it happens. And so because we underestimate that, there's this great need. There are people that have started to say, well, we need to do this within the government. We need to find ways to help people, get them back up on their feet, get them through difficult times. And then, of course, the resistance, right? Well, no, the government, we don't trust the government. Okay, well, you don't trust the government, then do something about it.
Yeah.
And these pregnancy centers are a great place to start, but it's not only pregnant women
Right.
that, or, people experiencing an unplanned pregnancy that are struggling with this question. There are people we have kids in our community center, their families, we have kids in our child development center, we have kids in our congregation, families that struggle everywhere. And what are we doing to help them? What are the people that have? What are they doing to help those that don't? You read in Acts in chapter 2, in chapter 4, over and over and over again, we see that the believer, there wasn't a single person among them that had any need.
Yeah.
Not a single person among them that had any need. We
that
could just
seems
start
like a
there.
fairy tale
It does.
to people today.
It seems like a fairy tale. I think they recognize need versus want,
Yeah.
right? And we struggle with that. We struggle mixing up wants and needs. We look around at the culture and we think, well, I want to be able to go to Disney World 3 times a year, and I want to be able to do this and I want to be able to do that. And,
and it's you bring up a good point, and when you open your eyes to it, all of a sudden, it's like one of those hidden picture things. It's all you can see.
Yeah.
Once you recognize the need, and it simply becomes a matter of believers deciding that it's a part of their lives as well. It's not someone else's life. It's I'm a part of this as well. You're talking about seeing young people, and once you start recognizing it, my wife is a high school teacher, and, she pays attention to this stuff, and, she's a great example, someone I rather admire in this regard. The number of times she's come by the church to go into our food pantry, put together a couple of bags of food, and just take it to a student's house. It's and this is what believers do. We engage the problem because for no other reason, it's a command of our Lord.
Mm-hmm.
He's protecting life. We should be invested in protecting life in every sense of the word.
Yeah. I think that people underestimate the issue, and it's happening actually on both sides. I think people that support the government doing some of these things, the government is sort of in the way a little bit, and big enough and complicated enough that it's messy to try and administer these things through government.
Yeah.
Because, I've tried to help people that come up. I mean, we had people sleeping on our benches, sleeping
Sure.
in the little walkway here. A number of different people. You try and help them get resources, and it's really hard. And it's easy for them to get discouraged and give up. It's easy for me to and you're trying to do your day, and now all of a sudden you have this thing, and it just consumes so much time. It's a complicated mess. So, okay, it is complicated. What do we do? How do we make it simpler? Is there a way outside of government to do it? I don't know. Who's working on it? Who's come up with that plan? Who's come up with that way of doing it? And it's not people that are just lazy. It's so hard to get out of it sometimes that maybe you look lazy to somebody if they catch you on a particular day, but it's not for lack of trying. It's despair.
Well, and how often have you had a conversation with somebody in this position who was quite obviously just completely dazed by their situation because they never expected to be there in their lives, just like you and I hopefully will never, experience that, but we're 6 months away from it at any given point in our lives.
Yeah. We are. And, I think we also run into a lot of people that are clearly gaming the system, sort of. We see them repeatedly.
Absolutely.
They're not really doing what they need to do to get out of their situation. But one thing that I think we forget to think about or don't talk about is that our culture actually is such that it suppresses any request.
Yeah.
Our culture says if you even ask, you're a horrible human being and a disgrace.
It's designed to shut you down.
You know what? Yeah, maybe there are some poor people out there, but you better not tell us or we're going to shame you.
Yeah.
America is very much a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of place. And I think that it's good as far as it's created a lot of prosperity, a lot of wealth, and it's been good for bringing up a lot of places around the world, maybe not always in the best way. I mean, there's a lot of not great stuff that goes along with it, but it is what it is. I'm not trying to.
I learned the origin of that phrase a while back.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah, I think it was England, 18th, 19th century. It was a newspaper thing. It was a joke meant to illustrate something that was impossible.
Well,
and we just sort of took it and ran.
A joke. Yeah, I got to make that a note here.
Yeah, that's a sermon somewhere.
So, and the second thing I want to make sure to point out here as we talk about poverty and all this sort of stuff, I realize that ancient Israel in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and America today are not exactly the same thing. Although maybe there are people out there that don't believe that. I'm sure there are people that think it is the same thing. It's not. America exists. America has a First Amendment.
Yeah.
That prohibits us from being more of what a lot of people would like it to be, particularly because in the colonizing of America, all the different Christian groups persecuted one another every time they had a chance.
Yeah.
So
that First Amendment protects us from becoming what a lot of people want it to be.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I, for one, like the fact that there is not one, because you get the Puritans, and then they persecute the Anglicans, and then the Anglicans persecute the Baptists, and then the Baptists persecute the Catholics, and then the Catholics. I mean, like, it's just our history of the colonies, right?
That's why the Lutherans always just went and hid out in the woods by
just
themselves.
Like, let's get away from these people.
That's right.
I just can't take this anymore.
You don't speak German? Go away.
It's not helping us today.
No, not really.
But when you look at the Old Testament, God actually commands that care for the poor be a part of everything that they do.
At every turn.
So when you have a field and you plant crops, you are forbidden to collect it all. And not only are you forbidden to collect it all, you have to leave the edges for travelers passing through and for the poor. If you carried a bunch, you had a big basket and you go to pick it up and you drop stuff, you are forbidden to pick it up.
There it must say.
And if you're not sure of this, you can actually see it at work in the book of Ruth.
Yeah.
Where Ruth
Great
is
example.
benefiting from the gleanings and the generosity and this structure to the society of Israel, right? She's a widow. Her mother-in-law's a widow. They have nothing. They return to Israel, and they find some, family type member, Boaz, right? Is going to be this kinsman redeemer. We could spend a lot of time going into all those details, but they go into his fields to get the stuff that is meant for the poor. And of course, he tells his people to leave a little bit more. He's trying to be a little extra generous. But still, the point remains, there is a provision commanded by God to ancient Israel to care for the poor. Is that government? I think we could make a case either way. It's government or it's private. I don't care.
You could argue that. I think the important thing to take from that is that God doesn't command things that people don't need reminders of.
Yes.
So the concept and the structure of the nation of Israel is wildly different from our society today. What is not different are people.
Yeah. What's wrong with the world? People. Right? That's our problem.
In the words of the great prophet Jerry Seinfeld, they're the worst.
We got a Seinfeld quote in today.
Yeah, it'll be my last. Sorry.
We're on fire. Woo! Yeah, I think we need a new generation of Christians that takes a hold of this idea. I don't know what the solution is. I know that there are an awful lot of people that think it's one or think it's the other, and that it's definitely not this or definitely not that.
And we need to ask ourselves, what solution are we looking for? And this is, you got to be careful with this quote. This is a bit of a cop out, I think that some people use, but in the Gospels, we have the story about the perfume that was used to anoint Jesus, and
the poor you will always have with you.
Yeah, and one of his disciples complained that this very expensive stuff that could have been sold, and we're always trying to look out for people. Why don't we give that money to somebody who needs it? And Jesus brings up the point that the poor will always be with you. And then he goes on to make a different point. This woman used the gift that she had to honor the Lord in the way that was available to her, which is great. So we don't look around at the problem and just say, well, it's always going to be here, so there's nothing I can do. The solution is, how do we always have a mind and a heart that seeks to help those who are in need?
Yeah, and the fact that the poor will always be with you is why Christians of all people are uniquely equipped to care for them.
Yeah.
Because it's miserable work. Like, it's not something that you're going to, maybe you go to a soup kitchen, you prepare a meal, and you go, and then you leave, and you feel
good about
right?
yourself, right?
But if you actually work with poor people,
yeah,
it is incredibly frustrating and demoralizing on a regular basis.
What you've talked about, the people we meet in our vocation that we try to help, or we try to steer in the right direction, for certain things. You do this job long enough, and you have to learn a new skill for how to personally deal with that burden, and not that the person is a burden, but the burden of knowing what life is like for, most people throughout the world. This is what life is like for most people on this planet. Yeah. It's going from one need to the next, and we don't like to acknowledge that. A lot of us are pretty comfortable, here in this society, and we like to imagine, well, that's the way it should be. That's the expectation. For people's lives. But that is not the expectation for most of the world. And so we have to readjust our thinking and develop some skills, that are often difficult.
Yeah, we are 330 million-ish in America. How many is it? Almost, I think India just eclipsed China as the most populous in the world. More than 1 billion.
Yeah.
I think I read something about them approaching 2 billion at some date in the future, maybe not that far away. China's another 1 billion. Gosh, I don't even know what Africa is, but there's got to be a lot of people there.
Yeah.
Europe is slightly less, I think, than the U.S., but comparable, around the same amount. They're probably not dealing with the same level of poverty as some of those other places, but most of those places, 98%, and we're not even talking about Central and South America,
right?
The Caribbean, Haiti. Oh my gosh, Haiti! Yeah. Have you ever been to Haiti or any of these? Yeah, it's awful. It's terrible. Even when you're in the lap of luxury in Haiti, their finest places, it still feels like you're in a poor country. Like you still know where you are.
Yeah.
So it just a sad state of affairs. But we have those people right outside our door too.
Sure, that's right. And we have a purpose.
And we have a purpose.
We have a commandment.
And we have a commandment to love God and to love our neighbor, to support every physical need that they have.
Yeah.
In addition to, of course, controlling our anger and not taking life.
Sure.
So, oh man, well.
Good thing we didn't get into anything controversial today.
No, yeah, I think we just lost everybody. I don't know how many
Both
spots.
of them?
Everything, yeah.
Sorry.
No. There's more than 2.
Okay.
Not many, maybe, but I don't know. Depends on how you define many.
That's true.
We got some folks.
We're glad to have them.
And if not, one of these days they will finally appreciate what we're doing, and they will go back and thoroughly listen to and study and investigate every single word that came out of our mouths.
Better than me.
Yeah. Well, anyway, no, I appreciate you. I appreciate having these conversations.
Yeah.
Even if nobody else is listening, it helps me.
Oh,
as
me too.
I've been trying to do things with our confirmation students, and I've thought about doing stuff on Sunday mornings too, trying to take some of these topics out and talk about them.
Well, and I think, what you and I are doing here should be an encouragement to all Christians, to sit down and to look at these concepts that are central to our lives and our identity and hash them out with somebody, get into these discussions, talk about the things that you agree with, that you disagree with, you and I are just two people trying to plumb the depths and find some answers here. Well, surely there's at least a couple of people smarter than us out there.
Yeah. Well, it's not even just about being smarter or anything like that. I mean, we are called to have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
And to think about these things. I talked about this a little bit last night. I'm glad you mentioned, kicking it around with somebody. Psalm 1, among, I don't know how many, just lots of other places in the Psalms and in the scriptures that talk about how important it is to consider God's rules, God's law, God's instructions, God's word in every sense. Psalm 1, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the ways of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. I think, verse 2 there is really 2 and 3 are the key. Day and night.
Yeah.
Kicking this around. Day and night, thinking about it, contemplating on it. I got so many things that I'm kicking around all day long, and it ain't usually these things. I'm thinking about how, you got a million things at home you have to work out with your utility companies or, other bill payments or planning for, retirement and saving or your budget or, where you going this weekend or all these things that we're occupied with
and we're
day
getting
and night.
Blown around
And
like
we
that
are,
chaff instead of, that great old song, we shall not be moved. Like a tree planted by the water.
We shall not be moved. We're getting blown around a bit, though.
Yeah.
Maybe take some time to consider this and the other commandments. Seems pretty important to me.
I think so.
So, any other words of wisdom for our faithful listeners?
I think they've heard enough from us today.
Okay. Well, y'all, hey, good to be with you. Thanks for tuning in. Let us know what you think. You got any questions, let us know. If not, that's okay. Just kick this around, kick the word around, spend some time having conversations around the dinner table with your family or friends from church, a small group, something like that, and find what I think the Psalm tells us, that you'll be like a tree planted by streams of water, bearing fruit, leaves don't wither. We need that. Stop getting blown around by the wind. Catch up with you soon. We'll see you later.